Okay, I want to talk about flat earthers for a minute. Not to mock them. Well, maybe a little. But actually to defend them. Sort of. In a way that's going to make some people in this audience deeply uncomfortable. Because the argument I want to make is that flat earthers, scientific materialists, and the modern church are all making exactly the same mistake from different altitudes, with the same confidence and for the same reason. And if you're the kind of person who laughs at flat earthers, which honestly, fair enough, then you need to hear what I'm about to say, because the thing that makes flat earth thinking ridiculous is the same thing that makes scientific materialism philosophically indefensible. And the same thing that's been quietly crippling the church for 200 years is the same thing. Once you see the structural parallel, you really can't unsee it. So, flat earthers. Here's what they actually do. They stand on the ground. They look at the horizon and they say, it looks flat. And you know what? They're not wrong about that part. The earth does look flat from the ground level. That's a genuine observation. They're not hallucinating. The problem isn't that they saw nothing. The problem is what they did with what they saw. They treated their field of view as the limit of reality. Once you've done that, once you've decided that what you can see from where you're standing is the complete picture, everything that challenges it becomes a threat rather than a correction. The satellite images, fraud. The moon landing footage, CGI. The photographs showing curvature, lens distortion. The mathematical models predicting exactly where spacecraft will be based on a spherical Earth, conspiracy. Every single piece of evidence from a higher vantage point, literally higher, physically above the level they're standing at, gets dismissed. Not investigated, dismissed. Because investigating it would mean taking seriously the possibility that the higher view might correct the lower view. And they're not willing to go there. And the scientific community watches all of this and says, these people are epistemologically broken. They built an unfalsifiable system. They have a pre-packaged answer for every counter-argument. They refuse the instruments, the mathematics, this perspective from above, because accepting any of it would cost them their conclusion. It's not science. It's a belief system masquerading as observation. And the scientific community is completely right. And then, and here's where I need you to stay with me. The scientific community goes home and does exactly the same thing, with a different subject, at a higher level of sophistication, with considerably more prestige, and with considerably less self-awareness. Welcome to flat heaven metaphysics. Here's what scientific materialism actually is underneath all the mathematics and the peer review and the justified confidence in its own domain. It's a decision that the instruments we have define the territory that exists. Not, we have investigated the question of whether reality extends beyond what our instruments can measure and found no evidence. That would be a legitimate scientific conclusion. What actually gets said and this is important because it gets said constantly, is the question itself is not a legitimate question. That asking whether there's a dimension of reality beyond material causation is like asking what's north of the North Pole. Not unanswered, but unanswerable. Not uninvestigated, but uninvestigatable. Off the map by definition. Now, you see what's happened here? The instruments don't just measure the territory. They define it. Everything the instruments can't reach isn't territory. It's nothing. The field of view is the limit of reality. That's flat earth thinking at a higher altitude in a nicer building. The flat earther says, I can't see the curvature, therefore there's no curvature. The scientific materialist says, I can't measure consciousness from the outside, therefore consciousness is just brain activity. I can't detect purpose in physical processes, therefore there is no purpose. I can't find God in the data, therefore there is no God. The structure is identical. The confidence is identical. The dismissal of the higher perspective is identical. And when challenged, when you raise the hard problem of consciousness, when you point out the extraordinary fine-tuning of physical constants, when you ask what gave the laws of physics their character before the laws of physics existed, their response is remarkably similar to the flat earthers. That's not a real problem. It just looks like one. That's a God of the gaps fallacy. That's philosophy, not science. Nothing gets in that threatens the conclusion. The system is closed. And a closed system with a pre-packaged dismissal for every challenge isn't science. It's a belief system with better equipment. Here's the thing. Scientism, the philosophical claim that the scientific method is the only valid path to knowledge about anything, isn't itself a scientific claim. You can't run an experiment to determine whether scientific experiments are the only valid source of knowledge. That's a metaphysical claim. And when a credentialed, serious scientist steps outside his laboratory and says there is no God, consciousness is just brain activity, transcendence is a human projection, he's not doing science anymore. He's doing philosophy. Badly. With the confidence of someone who thinks he's still doing science. He's the flat earther who looked at the horizon and said, I've measured it very carefully. It's flat. And any view that suggests otherwise is unscientific. Now, here's the altitude problem. Here's the thing about the flat earth error that makes it genuinely useful as an analogy. It's a problem of altitude. The earth looks flat from the ground. It looks curved from a plane. It looks obviously spherical from orbit. The higher you get, the more of the picture you can see. The flat earther isn't stupid for seeing flatness from the ground. He is making an error that's completely understandable given his position. The error isn't the observation. The error is the refusal to go higher. The refusal to take seriously what a higher vantage point reveals about the limitations of the ground level view. Now, here's a question I want you to sit with for a moment. What if matter is to the full picture of reality what the ground is to the shape of the earth? What if operating entirely within the material dimension is the epistemic equivalent of standing on the ground and declaring the earth flat? Not because the material observations are wrong. They're not. The earth does look flat from the ground. Matter does behave exactly the way physics says it does. The observations are real. The instruments work. The measurements are accurate. But accurate measurements from a limited vantage point don't give you the complete picture. They give you an accurate picture of what's visible from where you're standing. And if there's a dimension above the one you're measuring, a dimension that is to matter what orbit is to the ground, then all your accurate measurements are still missing something. Something that would be obvious from higher up. Something that would make the ground level picture suddenly make sense in a way it currently does not. The flat earther refuses to go up. The scientific materialist refuses to go up. The flat earther calls the higher view fake. The scientific materialist calls the higher view unscientific. Same move, same structure. Same refusal to take seriously the possibility that the view from higher up might correct the view from lower down. The higher view, the view that takes seriously a transcendent dimension above and responsible for material reality, doesn't just solve philosophical problems. It's like getting on the plane for the first time and seeing that all those towns that looked randomly scattered from the ground are actually laid out along a river valley. The lower view wasn't wrong about the towns. It just couldn't see the structure. And the specific higher view this channel has been working on isn't vague spirituality. It's a historically grounded claim about a transcendent God who demonstrated himself in the material dimension by declaring specific events before they occurred and then bringing them to pass. Here's a document. Here's history. Here's a correspondence between the two. Go and check it. The flat earther can't say that. He has to prevent you from going up because going up defeats him. But this view invites you to check. Examine the correspondence. See what you find. The scientific materialist who refuses that invitation isn't being rigorously scientific. He's being a flat earther with a PhD. Now here's the part nobody saw coming, including possibly you. Because everything I said about scientific materialism applies with uncomfortable precision to the modern church. Not the openly liberal church that's actually made its peace with the Enlightenment. I mean the conservative, Bible-believing, creed-reciting church that would be deeply offended by the comparison I'm about to make. The church, in a very large measure, has a flat heaven. After the Enlightenment, the church accepted a deal it didn't fully realize it was making. Science gets the objective, material world, reason, evidence, investigation. Religion gets the subjective, interior experience, personal relationship, devotional warmth, emotional encounter. You take the outside, we'll take the inside. And what that deal did quietly, gradually, over 200 years, was flatten heaven. Because once you've decided that faith is subjective and interior, God becomes whatever height your interior experience can reach, which isn't very high. The God of emotional devotion, the God of personal relationship, the God of sacramental participation, the God of doctrinal proposition. These are all ground level gods. Real in the way the flat earth is real. Genuine observations, but a symbol from below, from within the human religious system, from inside of the person looking up. And a God assembled from below, from human religious consciousness, that God is as flat as the earth looks from the ground. He's not actually up there. He's a projection of the human religious imagination onto the sky, which is exactly what Feuerbach said, and Freud, and Nietzsche. And they were right about that God, that flat heaven God. They just didn't know there was another one. Because the biblical God isn't the God of interior religious experience. He's the God who spoke from outside the human system entirely, who declared specific events before the conditions of their occurrence existed, who embedded his speech in history in a form that can be examined from the outside in, rather than generated from the inside out. That God is genuinely above, not metaphorically above, dimensionally above. The transcendence isn't a feeling. It's a structural fact about the relationship between the word that was declared and the history it was declared into. Isaiah 55, 8 through 9. And hear this not as a devotional comfort, but as a precise metaphysical statement. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. Higher than the earth, not slightly higher, not emotionally higher. As the heavens are higher. The same differential the flat earther refuses to acknowledge. The same differential the scientific materialist refuses to acknowledge. And the same differential the Enlightenment accommodating church flattened into a personal relationship with a God who conveniently fits within the range of human religious experience. And then Isaiah 46, 9 through 10, the verse that makes heaven genuinely three-dimensional. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done. This is what a God who is actually above looks like. He doesn't speak from within the material process. He speaks before it. He announces what's coming from a vantage point the material process hasn't reached yet. Which means he's not on the timeline. He's above it, looking down at it in a way you look at a river valley from the plain, seeing where it goes before the towns on the ground can see it themselves. That's 3D heaven. Heaven that is genuinely, dimensionally above the material. Heaven from which a specific word descends into specific history and can be traced, followed, confirmed by anyone willing to go to the text and the record and look. Not assembled from below, descending from above. The declarations came down, the history confirmed them, the correspondence is still there. So here's where we land. 3 groups, 3 versions of the same mistake. The flat earther treats his field of view as a limit of reality and refuses the higher perspective. The scientific materialist treats his instruments as the limit of reality and refuses the transcendent dimension. The flat heaven church accepted the Enlightenment deal and flattened God into the interior of human religious experience and ended up with exactly the God that Feuerbach predicted. A projection, a concept, a religious idea generated from below. All three are standing on the ground, declaring it flat. All three have a pre-packaged dismissal for the higher view. All three think their level is the complete picture. It isn't. Get on the plane. Look down. Notice what the ground level view was missing. And then consider what it means that the view from all the way up, from the God who declared the end from the beginning, has been described in specific detail in documents that are still sitting there waiting to be read. That's not flat earth thinking. That's the invitation to go all the way up and see what's there.